You're watching WBIN, the home of NH1 News.
In the middle of a business crisis, what do you do first? Should business schools treat students like their customers? How often do people forgive you when you tell the truth about a mistake? But first, when something horrible happens, how do you fix it with social media? This is the Language of Business look at how to use PR firms, sponsored by the Center Cafe, the down-to-earth atmosphere of a family-run neighborhood hideaway with great food, hospitality, and conversation. Center Cafe at the train station in Needham Center. Here's Greg Stoller.
Something horrible happens to you or to your company. How do you deal with social media to fix it? Brent Carney is a communications expert, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Pleasure to be here.
Is it possible to have a social media strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. But it really isn't necessarily about the social media aspect. It's about knowing who you're trying to communicate with, knowing your audience. That's the number one key to success in social media, because it's how you figure out if you're actually being successful with your overall plan long term. It helps you to determine which social media platform to be on. Knowing your audience is the place you need to start to really build that strategy. Without that, you really have nothing to work with.
But when you talk about social media strategy, it's like talking about the cloud.
Oh, absolutely. It's this concept that's just out there, but people really don't know what it means. We like to focus on analytics and making sure that works. And that's something a lot of smaller businesses really struggle with. They are on social media, they do it, but they don't really see any benefit. They don't know what they're getting out of it. And a lot of times it's because they don't ever look at the analytics. And being on there and being able to see month over month, quarter over quarter, are you making progress, where you're going? Those are things you need to do, because if it's not working, that will tell you, and then you can change your strategy. But again, going back to the audience as being kind of that linchpin, you need to be able to make sure you're reaching the right person, because if it's not your customer that you're reaching somebody in Idaho and you really want to reach somebody on the Cape, that's a problem, and you need to change what you're doing to make it right.
How often should you study your analytics?
Well, I look at analytics for the companies that I work with really on a daily or weekly basis. But I take that with a grain of salt, because there can be so many ebbs and flows in what the analytics show. You have one post that you put up there that catches fire and goes viral, that can skew everything. So you really want to have a longer term view of it. Look month over month, really quarter over quarter, and judge your progress that way. Don't judge it week by week or day by day. They're pieces of the puzzle, but they're not. You need to look at the whole picture to be able to really be understanding where you're going.
Are all aspects of social media created equally?
No, and that's why I say audience is so important. Every one of these platforms, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, they have different purposes in your overall strategy. So if you're trying to engage with influencers, Twitter's the right platform for you. If you're trying to reach millennials, 7 out of 10 millennials are using Snapchat. They're the place to go for that. But understanding your audience, understanding your goals will help point you in the right direction. Do 1 or 2 of these platforms really, really well before you start to think about spreading out into other areas.
So you're not advocating an 8-pronged social media strategy?
If you're a major corporation, yes. If you're a small business, start with Facebook, get it done, do it right. Then branch out from there depending on when your audience is.
The fact that all of them are ostensibly free, good or bad?
Well, they're not free, because the reality is, let's take Facebook as an example. Studies are showing that only between 13 and 30% of your audience is seeing any given post you put up. They have these analytics behind the scenes of their workings on their website that block people from seeing what you post. You need to put in a budget to advertise on all of these social media channels. You need to be putting money behind Facebook ads. You need to be putting money on Twitter as part of your marketing program. Standing alone and doing posts, it's nice. It's not going to be as effective as it could be. And really, it's short money. You can hit a target and be very specific with that target for just a little bit of money compared to some other advertising platforms that could cost a lot more money.
What do you consider to be a great return on investment?
I look specifically to make sure that if your audience that you're trying to focus on is interacting with your page, are they sharing posts on Facebook? Not just liking them, but are they sharing them and commenting on them? Is your audience retweeting you on Twitter or tweeting back at you? Are the people you're trying to look at engage with you or not.
Is there such a thing these days as bricks and mortar social media?
When you look at what social media has become, it's a foundation of its own. It used to be that your website was your foundation. Companies have now gone strictly to social media, and that's becoming kind of their platform to run off of. So it's an essential business tool now. If you're not doing those things, you're missing opportunities. So developing a strategy, getting it down, doing it, being realistic about your own resources. If you don't have the manpower to do enough photographs that are captivating to do Snapchat, don't do it. Do the ones you can with the resources you have, and be realistic to yourself about what that is.
Brent, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Brent Carney, communications expert.
Coming up, should business schools treat students like their customers? How often do people forgive you when you tell the truth about a mistake? And in the middle of a business crisis, what do you do first when the language of business look at how to use PR firms continues? This is the Language of Business look at how to use PR firms. Once again, Greg Stoller.
You're in the middle of a business crisis. What do you do first? Work on your spin, call a PR firm, or start to pray? Janie Bischoff is a public relations crisis management expert, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thank you for having me. Well, we need a lot of information. So as much information as we can get. So we start asking a ton of questions in order to understand everything that's happened. And clients very often will just focus on one thing, but there are usually multiple dimensions to a crisis. And we have to get all that information very quickly.
How quickly do you have to act?
Immediately. In today's world, we have no time. Everything gets picked up on social media almost immediately. And as a result, you have to be prepared ahead of time.
Is this true for small companies as well as big companies?
Every company today needs to have a game plan, whether they're large or small. Small companies may not be able to survive a crisis as well as large, notable brands like GM or Delta.
The facts are lousy for your clients. What do you do?
What's most important for companies that are experiencing a crisis is for them to really make sure that they're communicating, and that they're communicating honestly, appearing as transparent as possible. You don't ever want to look like you're hiding anything, and acknowledging the situation is the very first thing that you need to do during a crisis.
Let's look at the opposite. Your clients are getting vilified, and it's much ado about nothing.
Well, again, we need to be as transparent as possible, and very often, if that's the case, we're able to really convince the media and sometimes convince consumers that they're wrong. That's a rare situation, but sometimes it does work.
How do you define success for your client?
In a crisis situation, you want to mitigate the negative as much as possible. So we really want to make sure that we are putting out as much information as we possibly can, and showing that the company is empathetic, or that the individual in charge, the leaders, are empathetic. A great example happened very recently with Delta Airlines, where all of their computers went down, and they reacted very quickly, and they did a great job. They put their CEO out on Twitter, on social media, with a video, and he apologized, and he was very clear that, you know, this is not the way they want to operate as an airlines. They also did something else, which was very important. They offered customers $200 vouchers, which, in giving somebody something tangible, shows really good faith. And customers do appreciate that companies are trying their best, and that, you know, things happen and you can't always control them, but when you show that you care about your customers and you're trying to do the best you can and accommodate your customers or clients, it really goes a long way towards the public's perception.
But is $200 going to be enough of a consolation when your once-in-a-lifetime vacation got canceled?
Well, certainly they may lose some customers, but long-term, their reputation was not harmed in a way that it could have been had they not reacted that way and reacted that quickly. It goes to that level of preparation. Every company really needs to be prepared and have a game plan. In this day and age, they need to have their crisis team, both internal and external, set and ready to go, because again, you need to contact people on a moment's notice. You don't have time to start scurrying around. So you want to make sure that you've learned from a situation, and also if it was an operational issue, you want to make sure that the company has learned what they should do better on the operations side or other aspects of their performance.
Janie, thank you.
Certainly, my pleasure. Thank you.
Janie Bischoff, crisis management PR expert.
Coming up, how often do people forgive you when you tell the truth about a mistake? But first, should business schools treat students like they're customers? As the language of business look at how to use PR firms continues. Once again, Greg Stoller.
With over 100 universities in Massachusetts, should they consider students to be their customers? Joe Blumenfeld is the founder of EdTech 180, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thank you, Greg. Glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Should a university consider a student to be their customer?
Absolutely, but the university has a lot of customers, so it's a lot of stakeholders, really. There are alumni, parents, the students, the community in which they operate. There's a lot of them, but at the end of the day, the school exists to serve a need and a universe of people, and that's the student body.
Beyond being educational technology, how does EdTech work? So
EdTech is typically thought of as being personalized learning, and I've actually come to see it very differently than that. I think that's one element of it, but the real truth of the value of EdTech is that we're all lifelong learners, and it really comes down to where that learning takes place. So for some people it's at school, for some people it's at the workplace, some people it's home, some it's on the move, it's mobile, and we all learn our whole lives now. So the benefit of EdTech is that learning goes with you, and people can now learn anytime, anywhere, and that's really what EdTech is.
But there's irony in the fact that universities outsource so much of their PR. Why?
I really can't tell you for the university's perspective. I think that they are in many ways bastions of doing it the same way, and I think that it's a conservative, safe way to do it for them. But I think the real thing to look at, though, is what value some of those PR practitioners and some of the PR talent can deliver. And when it comes to EdTech, which is really different from tech and different from education, it's its own animal. It's its own beast, its own category. And I think having the expertise in that and able to do PR around that is a real advantage.
Does it differ between universities and K through 12?
It does differ. Those are two vastly different markets. So first and foremost, it comes down to privacy. So you've got students typically under 18 at K-12, typically over 18 in higher ed, and the privacy laws and expectations are different. And it's a challenge. The universities also have some private funding and some foundational funding that K-12 doesn't. And the real hurdle around funding K-12 is that every district is different. So in some instances they buy by the building, some they buy by the town, some it's by the county, some by the state, and it's really hard to prototype a K-12 customer. But it's a tough market to break into, and they're very, very different.
How do the success metrics differ between educational and private industry?
So private industry, especially publicly traded companies, have quarterly metrics that they're forced to measure, and they're really trying to understand on a real quarter-by-quarter basis what the sales is, what the revenues could be, what the profit margin looks like. Education's a different story, and simply put, kids don't learn in a quarter. So it really creates a culture clash between education and technology, for example, to understand how on the education side we can create metrics that will work quickly and be understandable and measurable, and at the same time recognize that everyone learns differently. And when you're dealing with K-12, for example, it's kids under 18, so you have to be careful about the data, and nobody wants their kid to be a guinea pig anyway, and it's a real challenge. I think what we're going to ultimately need is a meeting of the minds, where education folks and investment folks and technology people understand that we might need some different metrics because simply kids don't learn in a quarter.
But is that true of K through 12 and the university system?
It is true on many levels, because the university is even more pronounced. I mean, they're by the semester, and I think that's larger than a quarter. Let's call it 2 quarters. But even that, the rollout takes time, the implementation takes time. You have to make sure the infrastructure is in place, the support's in place for some of these things. A lot of us really fall victim to thinking that all educational institutions are like those that we went to, or that we are fortunate enough to send our kids to, and that's not the case. I mean, a lot of times ed tech struggles to be rolled rolled out. A lot of students don't know how to work it. A lot of instructors may not know what to do with it exactly and may not be comfortable with their students knowing more than they do. So the challenges are really multi-layered, and it really comes down to having a system in place that's flexible and could grow and be future-proofed. And it's a challenge on both K-12 and higher ed.
So if kids don't learn in a quarter, what does your sales cycle look like?
Well, the sales cycle typically looks like a typical sales cycle, whether you're selling widgets or education technology products, and that's part of the problem. But some of the sales cycle is long, some of it's quicker and shorter. So the private higher ed, for example, tends to be a quicker, shorter sale. They've got money, they've got needs, they've got the opportunity to meet some needs. Same with independent schools or parochial schools. Public K-12, where the sales are bigger, and the dollars are greater, and the opportunity is better, and quite frankly, the opportunity to improve the country is better, that's a longer sales cycle. And they may want something, but they also don't know what they want. And it's interesting because when you compare to almost any other private industry, there's a whole world, a universe of providing counsel and advice. What do we buy? How do we future-proof our purchases? How do we make sure the investment today matters tomorrow and we're not just throwing it away? In education, that really is very rare. It doesn't exist. And a lot of it comes from the fact that there's no line item to pay for those consultants for education to understand. So on the private side, you typically have a customer who understands the need and what the solutions look like in the marketplace. On education, they understand the need, but they don't always know what the solutions look like or what the implementation is required.
And who ultimately is your end user?
The end user is a student in most instances. Or if we're talking about lifelong learners, it's the individual learner in the workplace.
But the students aren't signing your contracts.
They're not. And so they're not the payer, but they're the end user, not the customer. And in terms of who's paying, sometimes it's the parent, sometimes it's the school, but it's the students are the ones that really matter most for most of these examples.
Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Joe Blumenfeld, founder of EdTech 180.
Coming up, how often do people forgive you when you tell the truth about a mistake? When the Language of Business look at how to use PR firms continues. You're watching the Language of Business look at how to use PR firms. Once again, Craig Stoller.
What possible mistakes can you make when using a PR firm? John Houle is the president of JH Communications, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Oh, thank you for having me, Greg.
What mistakes do people commonly make when they employ you to help them?
If you've been following the news lately, which I'm sure you have, I think sometimes the client can make a lot of mistakes. So sometimes they don't follow the advice of their public relations firms or their counselors, and when they sometimes make mistakes, they don't quickly correct them and tell the truth.
What's the difference between a PR mistake and a crisis?
Well, I would say a PR mistake is something that you could easily just go in and ask for forgiveness for. You make a mistake, you admit to it, and people give you forgiveness. I would say the crisis is the culmination of multiple mistakes where you don't ask for forgiveness and then it blows into a full-blown crisis.
And what happens when people are in deny mode?
When they're in deny mode, they sometimes go into this bunker mentality and they don't want to accept the truth, or they believe their own spin and their own alternate reality, and usually that's where we then go into crises and make even more mistakes.
How do you walk the line between wanting to keep a client versus being brutally honest?
I think a good public relations counselor has to be brutally honest. That's their job. Tell the client to be honest, get the right messages out. Oftentimes we're the one that has to protect the client from themselves.
What is your single biggest piece of counsel for people engaging a PR firm the right way?
Tell them the truth. Be brutally honest with them so that when you put them out there, if they're actually the front person and you haven't given them all the facts, when they are then out there and get burned, that's even worse.
What are the most common mistakes you see?
Common mistakes I often see are, 1, they don't tell the truth, okay? 2, usually the mistake people make is they have multiple people speaking and there are conflicting messages that end up resulting. You want a one coordinated message to go out there.
How forgiving is the general public?
Very. Very forgiving. I mean, we all are basically good people that want to give forgiveness. So it's hard, though, for clients to understand that. They usually want to bunker down. There's this whole former attitude of spin and, you know, get your message out there. But usually I think people are generally very forgiving, and you should just tell the truth. What our parents used to say, tell the truth. It's really not that hard.
What advantages do small firms have over their bigger versions?
I think the real answer to that is who you select as your public relations counselor. So you can select a public relations counselor from a small firm or a big firm. It's really the person you choose. In a big firm, you may be relegated to a backbencher or mid-level, whereas in a smaller firm, you may get the principal who has vast experience.
What mistakes can a client make when choosing a PR firm?
Sometimes a client may choose a public relations counselor that they've read their name in the paper handling other issues and other possibly crises. Sometimes that's not a good thing, because usually if you hire that person, everyone associates them with negativity. So now you're associating your brand and your company with the same spokesperson who's handled other controversial issues. So sometimes having the most popular crisis manager isn't always the best person.
What mistakes have you made as a PR firm over the years?
Sometimes I've gotten into the habit too of spin. And I think that's a common thing in my business. We want to get our clients' message out there, and we get a little clever and want to put a certain spin on things. And I think it's, in this day and age, especially with the internet and the way things are in the 24-hour news cycles, you can't spin anymore. It's a matter of people are going to find out, they're going to see that you're trying to be clever or cute, and it's going to be pretty transparent that you should just tell the truth. I also remember when I was a younger public relations person, and I remember a client I had was on a show like this, and during breaks I would go and whisper in his ear, and he said, "Don't do that. I don't want people to think that you're telling me what to say." So that was a mistake I made.
With all of the social media options available to you, which would you recommend the most during a problem PR period?
I think Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I think there probably should be a coordinated effort to sit down and think about the message that you want to say. And the other thing too is, when you're engaged in social media like that, you need to be on it all the time. So that's how that type of social media works. Expect to put your message out there and expect to be responding pretty much 24/7.
How much repeat business do you get in terms of helping clients through crises?
Usually, that's not the mainstay of my business. The mainstay of my business is more making sure that the public relations message matches the advertising message. Someone's newly hired, a new product comes to market, a new office opens, and there's a whole approach to announcing that in the media. But what I've seen is, if you handle people during a crisis, your name gets out there, and other people will come to you, and they'll come back to you if you told them to do the right thing, tell the truth, have that one coordinated message, speak clearly, concisely, one, concise message.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
John Houle, president of JH Communications in Providence, Rhode Island.
Thanks for watching The Language of Business, sponsored by the Center Cafe, the down-to-earth atmosphere of a family-run neighborhood hideaway with great food, hospitality, and conversation. Center Cafe at the train station in Needham Center. To join the discussion, go to languageofbusiness.biz.